So here in the in my third session, we are going to learn about sociolinguistics. So sociolinguistics is nothing but it where we see language in application. So it is in a way it is kind of a part of applied linguistics where we study language in context of human civilization or human environment. So sociolinguistics actually covers or tries to cover a lot of topics, and that's what I tried to do in these slides, because it is not a firm subject like it has some firm things like phonetics or morphology have. It doesn't have that. There are so many topics we will cover here, so let's get to that. So there are some quick facts. The fact one is we do not have any national language in India. So what Jawaharlal Nehru is saying himself, that he is saying the makers of our constitution were wise in laying down all the 13 or 14 languages were to be the national languages. There is no question of any language being more a national language than the others. Okay, so this is from a website and they have quoted it wrongly, like there are grammatical mistakes all over. So there is no question of anyone's language, it would be something like that. Okay, so what is here that when Jawaharlal Nehru was saying this fact, there were 13 or 14 languages which were there in 8th schedule. Later on, 8th schedule were updated with more languages, like the last languages which were added was Bodo, Dogri, Konkani, Maithili, Manipuri, Nepali, Santali and Sindhi. They are recognized later. There are total of 22 languages. So you have to learn the names of these 30 hours in the country you might know about, but the newspapers since this is from a government website, I think if you are to attempt these NTA exams, I think these are the facts you must consider about. So the fourth point here is Brahui, Malto and Kuruk are northern Dravidian languages, among which Brahui is spoken in Balochistan on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. That's why it is a fact. Because you know what, Dravidian languages are supposed to be something under, like something far beyond the Vindhanchal, something in the south of Vindhanchal in the South India, like the languages which are mostly spoken Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu and not Marathi, but Kannada. Marathi is an Indo-Aryan language. Okay, so these are the 4 languages which are there, which are state languages of Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, or Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. So, but Brahui, Malto and Kuruk, these are the 3 languages which are spoken in the north side of Vindhanchal or the Vindhya mountain region, and they are Dravidian languages. And among them, Brahui is very significant because it is not spoken in India. It is spoken in Balochistan, which is in like Afghanistan and Pakistan. So it is a very unique language because it's a Dravidian language. So some people, based on this fact that it is one of the facts which support the Aryan invention theory, or that fact that the language which was spoken before in the civilization must be something of a Dravidian language. But there are some discourses, there are debates like whether it was a Dravidian language or Austrasian or some form of a Indo-Aryan languages which was not some Nordic language. So there are debates according to this. So language families of India. Languages spoken in South Asian region belong to at least four major language families. Indo-Aryan, most of which belong to its sub-branch Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Austroasiatic, and Sino-Tibetan. Among one-third of our mother tongues belong to the Indo-Aryan family of language. And it is spoken by almost 73% of Indians. The Dravidian language is the second major linguistics group of the country, and less than 0.73% is of the total population of this country speaks the languages belonging to the Sino-Tibetan or Tibeto-Burman family. So, including the lone language Khamti, which belongs to the Siamese Chinese subfamily of Sino-Tibetan, the Sino-Tibetan languages stood at 226. So, this is from the same website again. So, there is the languages belonging to Austroasiatic family. There are 65 languages accounted for a total number of 6.19 million of speakers, and on the top of it all, 530 were still recorded as unclassified languages. So there are still 530 languages which are not categorized or which are not classified in any of these language families. There are 530 languages like this, and so there is the case of Khasi. Khasi is an Austroasiatic language that is spoken in Meghalaya. It's an Austroasiatic language which is not spoken in the Chotanagpur Malbhum region, the Chotanagpur Plateau region. It is not spoken there. It is spoken instead in Meghalaya Plateau region, and it is an Austroasiatic language. It is an SVO language again, like the word order of the sentences is subject verb object, which is very rare in the context of India. Most Indian languages are SOV, subject object verb. Khasi is part of Austroasiatic language family and related to Khmer, Palau, Vietnamese and Mon Khmer languages of Southeast Asia, rather than the Mundari or Nicobarese branches of that family, which is spoken in the East Central India and in the Nicobar Island respectively. So this is, there will be probably a question like, what is Khasi? There will be at least one question about Khasi, whether it is an SBO language or what kind of language family it belongs to. So there might be this. Okay, Huma, you asked about 8th schedule. So 8th schedule is a schedule in constitution which is talking about languages, official language and language family. So you can look it up on the internet. It is there in the 8th schedule. More facts. These facts are about purely socio-linguistics. Okay, these are very basic facts. That is speech communities. A speech community is a coherent group of people which share the same language or languages and more or less the same norms of languages use. The members of a speech community form a network of interacting individuals which communicate linguistically with one another frequently and more intensively than they engage with outsiders. And dialects. Dialects is a variety of language characterized by a particular set of words, grammatical structures, and phonetic or phonological characteristics that is associated with a particular geographical region, or age, or social class, or gender, or religion. Okay, these are called varieties. Variety and dialect, these two words are used interchangeably to determine the same thing, like a variety of language characterized by the particular set of word, grammatical categories, and phonetic or phonological characteristics. So it is not necessarily belonging to the particular geographic region, but when we talk about dialect, primarily we think about geographical or regional dialect. So we talk about a middle class dialect when we consider about a class, or for gender we can say, we can think how male members of a society or a speech community and female members of the same speech community use language very differently. The third term is diglossia, where a situation comes in which two very different varieties of a language are used throughout the speech community. The different terms of formality. This one, the high variety is associated with formal situation, the other, the low variety, with informal situation. This term is also used for bilingual situation in which the language differs in the time of formality. And isogloss is a line drawn on map to show the boundary of an area in which a linguistic feature is found. So we will now learn all of these four terms with examples, which I haven't talked about before. So speech community. Think about India and think about all the languages that belong to the Indo-Aryan family. So you can think about it as a speech community. Again, a language family can be a speech community. Then the speakers of Hindi or the speakers of Ahomia or the speakers of Bangla, they are in themselves a speech community. And then again, the speaker of the Sundarbani dialect of Bangla, that is again a speech community in itself. So it is, for an obvious fact, the speech community, like if it is their mother tongue, they will be more comfortable in speaking in that language instead of another language. So that's what happened when somebody goes to a foreign country and meets somebody speaking to their own language. They are very happy. This is because of that. Like speech community, it is a community. Use, like, look at this word community. So we will communicate linguistically with another frequently. So dialect, what are the examples of dialect? So for a regional dialect in Hindi, we can think about all the Khari Boli speaking individuals. Khari Boli, see the word Boli, it is also a dialect. Also, another dialect will be Braj, another dialect will be Avdi. All these dialect is synthesized and standardized, and this standardized form which we see is the standard Hindi. Also in Bangla, similarly, there are several dialects like Rarhi, Bengal, and also the dialects spoken in Purulia. There are many variations actually. We cannot strictly categorize dialects again because they vary from region to region, from class to class, from age to age, like generation gap also, make a very much difference in how a language is spoken. So age, the dialects also differs like that. Also gender, if you think about Japanese, that has a very broad gender variation. Like in Japanese, how the males speak and how the females speak is very different, because females, in their first person, females refer to themselves as watashi, but males refer to themselves as something like boku, or very informally they refer to themselves as ora. But in formal context, males also refer to themselves as watashi or ratashi. And there are different things like kawaii and all that term associated with mostly females. Female are mostly expected to speak in a high pitch or a very gentle, so-called gentle tone. Also, there are caste or class variations that is there in India. There are several research papers which you will get to read when you come to the center. So diglossia is, so I have defined diglossia as different varieties, the formal and informal varieties. So there is like high Latin and low Latin, bastardized Latin as well. Also in Bangla, there was something called Sadhu Bhasha and Cholito Bhasha. So this Sadhu Bhasha, this is basically considered as high variety. There were much more examples of like Tatshama Tatshama words are words derived from Sanskrit words or Tadbhav words. But in Cholito Bangla is the most colloquial spoken form of Bangla. So that's why we define or we remember diglossia like high variety and low variety. Also how language is written or spoken differently. And isogloss is basically a line drawn on a map to show like a linguistic feature is found. Like there will be a line isogloss in Indo-Aryan and Dravidian language families. The mountain itself kind of works as a natural or geographical isogloss in this case. So even more facts. So there we will learn about two terms, two dichotomies basically, Lang and Perrault, something like Perrault. I can't speak French anyway, and there is competence and performance. So in Lang and Perrault, I will refer to it as Perrault from now. Lang is basically referring to language or tongue, and Perrault is basically speech. So this is a coinage by Ferdinand de Saussure in his book Course in General Linguistics. Like note this name, Course in General Linguistics. They might ask this question, who is the writer of this book? So La Langue denotes the abstract systematic principles of a language without which no meaningful utterance will be possible. And Langue represents the work of a collective intelligence which is both internal to each individual, also it is collective insofar as it is beyond the will of any individual to change. And Perrault on the other hand is the individual act, statements and utterances, events of language use manifesting each time a speaker's ephemeral individual will through his combination of concepts in his phonation. So these are all very complicating all this definition. It's very French anyway. So this is again we can compare this dichotomy to something which is more intelligible to us, that is competence and performance, which is proposition by Noam Chomsky. And you will encounter this name again and again when you will be studying linguistics or in media studies. In linguistics, the distinction between a person's knowledge of language and use of it, that is competence and performance. So this knowledge of language or the competence can actually be understood as Langue. And the use of it, the performance, it can be understood as Perrault. There is not much significant difference between these two dichotomies. So performance contains slips of tongue and false starts, also represents only a small sample of possible utterances. The terms were proposed by Chomsky in aspects of theory of syntax, so mostly all the syntax related books. If there is any question about that, you mostly remember that will be by Noam Chomsky. When he stressed the need for a generative grammar that mirrors the speaker's competence and captures the creative aspect of linguistics ability. In Knowledge of Language, that is another book by Noam Chomsky. It is also a very significant book. He replaced the terms with I language, internalized language, and E language, externalized language. So I language, that is competence, that is already what we know. That is already what is there. The information there is about somebody's language. Their syntax, their grammatical aspects, their categories and everything else. And E language is the use, when language is in use. The Perrault, the performance of the performative aspect of language of a person, of an individual. So this is that. Okay. Frequent question. I will go to these questions later. Okay. Language contact and change. So there is code switching, code mixing, Pidgin and Creole. These are the terms. Code switching is nothing but when we alternate between two or more languages when we are speaking. So like when we were using something like मैं तो उस दिन जा रही थी but something came in between, I couldn't go. So look at this sentence, look at this discourse, look at this narrative. There are basically two languages I have used. So when language is in use, when we know more than one language, we sometimes tend to use these two languages. So that is when it will be called code switching. Also, it can be a switch between two variations or dialects. And code mixing is a hybridization of two languages. And hybridization of two languages mean like मैं उस चेयर पे बैठी थी and here the chair, which is an English word, it comes in this Hindi sentence, and although it can be called a loan word or a borrowing, but it can also be an example of code mixing. And when we code mix a lot, later on it comes into a loan word or a borrowing phenomenon of borrowing. So this is how we see languages. They are in contact and they're changing. These are the processes how languages change after coming into contact. And a pidgin is a reduced language with simple grammar, small lexicon, and small stylistic range that is no one's mother tongue. Actually, there is a little bit glitch in this. Okay, so pidgins arise in situations in which speakers of mutually unintelligible languages come in through contact through economic activities such as trade or slavery. Like what happened in the context of pidgin is when two very different language family or two people who are speaking two very different languages and they do not know each other languages, but they still have to communicate. They come into contact with each other and they have to develop something in between. That's how pidgin is basically formed. Also, the slavery is a very important role player in the context of pidgin historically, because pidgin also grammatically simplifies both of these two languages' different aspects. And there are some examples of pidgin. Is like there are many pidgins in the world. Okay, like still now we will see there will be pidgins because when the indentured laborers were taken from Bihar and Bengal to the West Indies, the islands of West Indies, and they came across the African people, also the people from English speaking people, they had to develop something in between, the pidgin language. And the pidgin, when it begins at a pidgin but eventually becomes the first language of a speech community, it becomes a creole. And there is a creole, there is an example of creole in India, that is Nagamese. You just remember this word Nagamese, which is a creole of Bangla and some Sino-Tibetan languages like Manipuri or Assamese or Naga languages, the indigenous languages there, and they all like translate and become something like a Nagamese. So Nagamese is a creole language that is there in India. And the lexifiers or the lexicon of Nagam is mostly Assamese language, and there are several different creoles like Guadeloupean, and creoles are mostly you will see in trade centers of the world where slavery was very high. In those cases, you will see a lot of creole. And creole is a French term, and it means to create, to breed, to raise something. You will not see many creoles in Europe now, by this example, English can also be considered a Creole because it was amalgamation of Anglo-Saxon with Germanic, with Norse, and with French in its earlier forms, and then it became something. All the languages, most of the languages begin as Creole, but they are not considered Creole because of colonial bias. So language shift, and that this is also a very important topic in sociolinguistics, where language maintenance denotes the continuing use of a language in the face of competition from a regionally or socially more powerful language. So we now hear a word called Hindi imposition, that fact that Hindi is being imposed on other regional languages of India, but still in the face of it, the regional languages like Kannada or Tamil or here Assamese or Bangla, they are successful to maintain its existence from this Hindi hegemony. So the opposite of the term is language shift. We will see the examples of it in Choto Nagpur Plateau region, where the Austro-Asiatic languages like in Jharkhand, the Mundari or the Santali, all of these languages were kind of became extinct or faced this danger of extinction because of this Hindi imposition, or in Bengal of Bangla imposition. So it denotes the replacement of one language by another as the primary means of communication and socialization within a community. So we had a guy in our class who was originally a Mundari speaker, but his family stopped speaking in Mundari and opted for Hindi because Hindi has a more higher social status in the society. That's how this language death happens. When the community is the last one in the world to use this language. So Sarah Thompson notes that the event of language death is a melancholic event because the loss of language deprives the speech community of much more. It deprives the community of their culture, because a large part of a culture must inevitably vanish with the language. Language death is not a modern phenomenon. Historical records are littered with names and sometimes attestations of dead languages. But current rate of language loss are alarmingly high and a matter of urgent concern to linguists as well as to the speakers of the endangered languages, because of this hegemony or because of this trade, because of some government rules and regulations, because of sometimes like the status of a language have in society, because of pejorization and all of these, the language death happens. And there are Mistri's list of 4 kind of language deaths, that is gradual death, sudden death, radical death, and bottom to top death. So gradual death involves a gradual replacement of one language by another, with a community of speakers acquiring a second language, which eventually become more and more common in the daily usage of the speech community. So that is how like the Gaelic was replaced in England by English, like in parts of Scotland also, how Irish was kind of replaced. Also Irish, it was kind of a radical death. Sudden death involves rapid extinction of a language with an intervening period of without an intervening period of bilingualism. It is less common than gradual death. Reasons includes momentous events which can wipe the population who speak it, such as genocide, disease, or natural disaster. The last speaker is generally monolingual in the dying language, as in the case of Tasmanian. Radical death, due to severe political repression, a community has to opt out of self-defense to stop speaking their own mother tongue. The last speakers are thus fluent in the dying language, but they refuse from using or transmitting the language to their next generation. For example, the massacre of thousands of Indians in El Salvador. By Indians, they are meaning natives, not the Indian Indians. So, El Salvador in 1932 led the surviving speakers of the Kakaopera or Lenica to stop speaking these languages as a survival strategy so as not to be identified as natives or Indians. Here, bottom to top depth is the case where language ceases to be used as a medium of conversation but may survive in spatial use like religion or folk songs. For example, like Celtal is dying in Mexico, but only a few older speakers in scattered villages, but it survives in the register of prayer. So this might be the case of old Latin or like old English, or they are in scriptures and all that, but they are not in regular use. Although these languages like Latin and Sanskrit, they cannot be called dead language in any way, because the language death didn't happen. Language evolution happened. Like all the Indo-Aryan language we speak are kind of not the Dravidian or Austrasian Sino-Tibetan languages, but most of these Indo-Aryan languages is somehow a surviving form of how Sanskrit was. Like there were Prakrits, which was not really Sanskrit, but incorporated most aspects of Sanskrit, but they evolved into something like regional languages like Bangla, Hindi, Sindhi, Punjabi, Maghi, and all these languages we have in northern India. So this is how language is, and from there we will get to neurolinguistics instead of sociolinguistics once again. Okay, I will take the questions. Huma says frequent questions asked from which topics, and okay, sociolinguistics, they will either ask facts or definitions. By definitions, I mean they will give you two statements and ask like whether which statement is true, which statement is false. So that's how these definitions or kind of comprehension questions come. There might be comprehensions once again, from which there will be sociolinguistics question. Also there will be facts like 8 scheduled languages and the 22 languages, and something about this Khasi language or Brahmi language. This is spatial cases, so read about spatial cases. Also some pidgin, some prayers they might ask. Also language acquisition, which is not really under sociolinguistics, but they might ask some question from this. Also, yeah, language families of the world, like the agglutinating languages, isolating languages, and all this. So I will talk about this, although I do not have a slide made. I will include this slide later. I will talk about this language families in the world, like this language typologies. And Asta is asking which sources should be considered to learn facts and figures for the exam. Okay, so Asta, I have already uploaded these books in Google Drive. I will make a list of sources again. And facts and figures, I will also include some diagrams and some charts in all this, and I will upload all these slides. Okay, Astha is asking they are not considered Creole because, Astha, can you specify what were you exactly asking? Otherwise, I do not understand.
Yeah, so you were saying that English can be considered a Creole language, but it is still not considered Creole because you said something I missed that part.
Because of this colonialism bias, because you can see all this history of languages or the historical language. So this comes under both sociolinguistics and historical linguistics. Okay, when they are mostly considering for Pidgin and Creole the incidents which happened after the phenomena of worldwide colonization, after the after the system, the world order system converted from feudalism to capitalism. So after that colonization happened, or simultaneously the colonization happened. So Pidgin and Creole, as we know about them now, they are specifically the results of colonizations or sometimes trades, like how they, in Hong Kong, there is something like Cantonese is spoken, which is kind of a Creole, because it is considered Creole because it happened only after this colonization period, although there were not any incident of colonization on China by the Britishers. But Hong Kong was a port which was captured by the British for a long time, and only in 1990s, it has been transferred back to China. So this Cantonese is still spoken in Hong Kong. So this is how these are considered Creole and not like something. English is not considered as a Creole, or Bangla, which is also an amalgamation of many languages, because you see it is a melting pot, because there are Indo-Aryan languages in its border, also Austroasian languages in its border, also Sino-Tibetan, and these three language families have direct influence on Bangla, but still it is not considered a Creole, even after like being kind of a mixed language, because many factors come across, because it happened in some ancient time which we cannot really have any chronicle about. So that is why they are not considered Creole anymore. Okay, so yeah, is the concept of language death? No, language death was not something which is given by Sarah Thompson, but I will tell you. Okay, give me some time. I am just telling you who gave this concept of language death. Uh, okay. Wait, I forgot the name actually. Okay, I will write the name later, Huma. The Astha's Vasanam, there are still very less speakers. Okay, by now I should mention this, that Sanskrit and Latin, all these classical languages we see in scriptures, they were never spoken by humans. They were either spoken only in the courts or in the literary languages. So it is already Sanskritized. Like Sanskrit is a language. When the Prakrits are Sanskritized, by Sanskritized I mean they are kind of like they're compiled, and some kind of grammatical structures, prescriptive grammatical structures are made out of those. So Sanskrit, or like Latin, they were only spoken, like if it consider if when we consider this nature of speaking, it is only spoken by some upper class or upper caste strata of the society. So they are like never were in existence, because their existence was not natural, but it was kind of synthetic. So Sanskrit did not evolve into many other languages. Basically, some form of old Indo-Aryan, which we still call Sanskrit, but it shouldn't be called Sanskrit. It evolved into Prakrits, and Prakrits then evolved into Abhatas, and then they evolved into many other languages. So we cannot say that it is dead, because it is evolved and there are speakers of it still. So we cannot consider Sanskrit or Latin as dead languages, because it is always there in all the scriptures and everything. Okay, so from now. sorry, like from when I started to become inaudible because hello.
Since you answered the last question,
Okay, so I have to repeat this neurolinguistics part again. So in neurolinguistics, we do not see many questions coming from this part basically, except for this Broca and Wernicke's diseases. And these diseases, they are speech related diseases from and mostly from like speech production related diseases instead of auditory diseases. Okay. So Broca's area is named after Paul Broca, which was a French physician, and this area refers to the front part of the temporal lobe of the language dominant hemisphere of the brain. See this temporal lobe here in the diagram. Although this diagram is very small, you can look it up about in Google, and it is front part of the temporal lobe of the language. It is somewhere in there, and it is 2 centimeters across, and we do not have to really learn about area, but we just have to learn about Broca's area in the frontal part, and Wernicke's area is in the back side of the brain, in the temporal lobe once again, or in the cerebrum, and it is associated with the comprehension of speech, where Broca's area is associated with the production of speech. So aphasia, which is the name of the disease, it is the impairment of language function as distinct from muscular of the speech organs. Okay, it's the language function due to the brain damages, often as a result of a stroke, a tumor, or a head injury. The original evidence of Broca's and Wernicke's as language centers come from this post-mortem analysis of aphasic patients who came with this aphasia, these diseases. Broca and Wernicke both found associations between certain types of aphasia and damage to the regions of the brains of the patients named after these people, Broca's area and Wernicke's area. These are related to Broca and Wernicke's aphasia. So here is a chart. This is from William McGregor. So syndrome is Broca's aphasia, and you can see the symptoms, you can see the locations of brain lesion. So I will not go into the details of it, but there are like 5 kinds of major aphasias. There are many more, and you see when global aphasia is when the large part of frontal and temporal areas get damaged, and it actually combines symptoms of both Broca and Wernicke's aphasia. So always remember one thing: Broca's aphasia is actually related to speech deficiency. Like speech deficiency, by it what I mean is there is some problem with speech production, and Wernicke's aphasia is the patient can speak fluently, but it is often incomprehensible because the patient cannot comprehend because of some kind of brain damage. So there is conduction aphasia and anomic aphasia again, and inability to name things or events, that is anomic aphasia. Also conduction aphasia is problem with the repetition of speech. Through comprehension is usually good, sound and meaning appear disconnected, also fluent. Also there will be many pauses and everything. So this is it, and there is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which some people also associate with neurolinguistics, and it is also a very major hypothesis in the linguistics. Although there is many debates and many linguistics, among whom there is Noam Chomsky, they have discarded Sapir-Whorf hypothesis altogether. There is a Hollywood movie called The Arrival that exactly deals with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I think that is one of the only films that is made on some thing like of linguistics, because it's a very pop linguistics theory. Okay, there is no basis of this hypothesis, but you have to know about this. It's very interesting. a hypothesis about the relation between language and thought that was stated in its most explicit form by the American linguist Edward Sapir and Benjamin Holt. So their theory was about whether language and speech and to what extent, sorry, language and thought, and to what extent they influence each other. So it is sometimes referred to as simply Whorfian hypothesis because he adopted the most extreme version of the hypothesis. So it can be separated in two components: the linguistic relativity and linguistic determinism. Sorry. Linguistic relativity, according to which lexical and grammatical differences between language correlate with long linguistic cognitive differences. Like, for instance, the existence of a number of terms for similar objects in a language like mount, ridge, hill, mesa, plateau, cape, and mountain, with correlate with different ways was habitually thinking about geographical projections. While if a single term is used, it is likely that range of objects will be regarded as the same. So it basically means if somebody is like a language speaking community is sitting on the plains and they do not see these plateaus, hills, and they will not have many lexical items related to this in their lexicon. This is actually very like normal to have. So the principle of relativity holds that a language and habitual modes of thought are correlated. It doesn't presume a causal relation between them. The second aspect is linguistic determinism. This notion differences in cognitive styles between culture, differences in their habitual ways of thinking are due to the differences of grammatical and semantic systems of language. So it is saying that since there are differences in grammatical and semantic system of two different languages, their cognition will be in a very different way. The culture will be different because their language is different. So the thinking about geographical features, mount, ridge, hill, mesa, plateau, cape, and mountain as either different or same would be the consequence of the language system in the case of lexicon. So these geographical areas will be thought as same because of their language system. So this is actually very different from this linguistic relativity. The linguistic relativity is a theory which is mostly considered by everyone, but determinism, it is not considered by everyone actually. So yeah, there is this next slide which talks about the Griersonian map. So note this name, Grierson. Grierson is somebody who conducted the very first linguistic survey in India, like what language is spoken in which region of India. This is a study which is first conducted by Grierson in a broader term. And this is something called grade vowel shift. So grade vowel shift, you do not have to learn all these things. This is very scary, I know. And the grade vowel shift, you have to just know that how this high vowels became low vowels and all that. This is called grade vowel shift. This is a phonetic phenomena, and this happened in English language from when it evolved from Germanic, High Germanic or German languages. And the last slide here it is about language acquisition steps. That is like how children acquire language. When they coo, they're typically in the age of 3 to 5 months. They utter these vowel-like sounds. In babbling, they repetitive CV patterns. Like by CV pattern, we mean consonant vowel pattern. And so remember another thing, that is when children learn to speak, they mostly use bilabial CV patterns like mama, papa, dada. they use these things like dental and bilabial. These are the two areas children focus about when they're producing something akin to a speech sound. They are not in the stage of comprehension. When they're about 1 year, they kind of start comprehending the words with their semantic relations, like they say single open class word or word same, like they can say water, that means they are very thirsty, they might need water, or they can just point to water and say that is water, and they say water, something like that. Towards stage they will say something like give water, many sentences, or I go, papa goes. They can understand and they can utter these kinds of sentences. And in telegraphic stage they will say something like sentence structure of lexical word, grammatical morphemes and all that. And actually they will not use functional grammatical morphemes, like they will still not know how things are inflected. Like they will say something like I go, papa go, mama go and all that, like without using the aspect or the inflectional morphemes of it. And later multi-word stage, that is 30 plus months, like when they're about 2.5 years, they start, although their phonetics is not yet perfected according to the language's grammar or language's vocabulary, but still they can speak. They can produce something akin to normal human speech sound. This is the last slide, and but it is not ended yet. There are some facts I haven't discussed about, that is how sounds change in languages. I could have discussed about this in morphology, but I still didn't, because there were some aspects of sociolinguistics which we needed to talk about. So I will start presenting that slide. Can you see like processes of sound change? So this is from an assignment I have done from my second or third semester, I guess. So assimilation, these are all sound changes, how sound change happen, and this is very important. There will always be more than 5 questions from this processes of sound change. So assimilation is when two sounds are adjacent to each other and one sound influences another sound to change. And these two sounds become more similar to each other, and this process is called assimilation. So there is regressive and progressive assimilation. Progressive assimilation is when xy in a like construct like xy, it becomes something like xx, so it is progressive because the first character is influencing the second. So a change is total assimilation if a sound becomes identical to another by taking on all its phonetic features. A change is partial if the assimilating sound acquires some traits of another but not fully identical to it. So you will read about this. I will upload it. It's like Sanskrit Padma becomes Bangla Poddo. See this D sound, the sound is influencing the ma sound when it is coming to Bangla. The ma is getting completely obliterated and it is becoming something like Poddo. So this is an example of total contact progressive assimilation. It is total because aim assumes all the features of the conditioning D. Contact because aim is immediately adjacent to D, and progressive since D before aim conditions aim and turns it into the. So Proto-Indo-European swept no, which is like from which we also get the word swapna or shopno or something like that. The something which means dreaming, it becomes Latin somnus, which also means sleep. This change is partial because P only takes on some of the features of the conditioning in the na. It becomes more like na by taking on its features of nasality, becoming mo, and the paw next to the no is a contact change. It is regressive because the paw before the no, it conditions the change. Dissimilation is the exact opposite of assimilation. It involves sound change where two sounds become dissimilar to each other. So, like English dialect dissimulate the sequence of two nasals in the word chimney, they call it chimbley. Some dialects of English. Deletions. There are different forms of deletions like syncope, apocope, or some things. So deletions refer to the syncope refer to the deletion of a vowel from the interior of the word, like starting in Vulgar Latin and continuing in the Western Romance languages. The unstraight vowels other than a or a, this will be pronounced as a, not a, other rather than a, were lost in the interior of words 3 syllables long or longer, like populu, which become people, reflected by French pupil, and Spanish pueblo. Fabulary, to talk, became habla, to speak in French habla. Apocope refers to the deletion of a sound, usually a vowel, at the end of a word, like Sanskrit manushva becomes manush in Bangla. The wa sound is apocopated. Apraesis refers to the deletion of initial sound of a word. This is how a place name Esplanade in Kolkata becomes Planade in people's pronunciations. So this type of change is very common in Spanish dialects actually. There is also this phenomena called epenthesis or insertions. The prothesis refers to a sound change process where a sound, generally a vowel, is inserted at the beginning of a word. Like we see that in Hindi, sometimes words like station or the Sanskrit word stri, this becomes something like station or station or istri or istiri. So this is how we are. This is where we are actually including all the vowel sound where it was not supposed to be there in its beginning. And anaptexis is something like which makes this vowel consonant consonant vowel constructed into vowel consonant vowel consonant vowel consonant, and this is, you will get this a lot in Japanese. Like when you will see something like Bertold, they will call it Bertoldo, something like that, because there is no consonants together that can be there in Japanese, like only if they are the same consonants. So this anaptexis, it is a kind of epenthesis which is also called swaravakti in Indo-Aryan context. So this is when an extra vowel is inserted between two consonants. So the prothesis, and a difference between prothesis and this process is basically prothesis is where the vowel is inserted in the beginning of the word, but here it is inserted between two consonants. In Bangla, Rotno, James becomes Roton as a vowel is inserted between ta and na. So, two consonants. Here, one thing is to be noted that the final O of Rotno is also apocopated again. This is a regular change in many Bangla dialects. Excrescence, it is a type of epenthesis which refers to a consonant being inserted between other consonants. Like in Proto-Indorian, amarthas becomes Greek ambrothos, immortal. here this is the bo sound which is being inserted here. So there are very few examples of this, but there are many examples of this when Proto-Indo-European is becoming something like Greek or Sanskrit or Latin or some other languages. Metathesis is a process where transpositions of sounds, it is a change in which sounds exchange position with one another within a word. So most instances of metathesis are sporadic changes, like in Bangla dialects, rickshaw becomes rikska. So the pishach, you know the word pishach, that is there in Sanskrit. So this means something like vampire or zombie or monster. It becomes something like pishach. It becomes pishach. So pichash. Riksha becomes rishka. So this is always there in most languages. Like I think these examples I have spoken, that is not only in Bangla dialect but in other Indo-Aryan languages we see in India. So most sporadic examples of metathesis occurs in history of English, like Old English braid becomes something like a bird, the Old English rush. Something from with the asho, the Sanskrit word asho or the word hoy comes from, this is also PIE root. So this rosh becomes horse. Haplology is another sound changing process where the name given to the change in which a repeated sequence of sounds is simplified to a single occurrence. Like there is the word pacifism, which comes from pacificism. In Bengal, this boro dada, this sometimes reduced to da, and some honorifics reduced to this, like that. So this are the examples. Rhotacism, rhotic sounds are the raw sounds, all kinds of trills, trap or flaps or approximants, all these raw sounds are called rhotics together. So this rhotacism refers to a change in which sa or za becomes ra. Usually this takes place between vowels or glides. Some assume that often cases of rhotacism go through an intermediate stage of saw to za to ra, where saw is the first voice, it is first turns into voice and then it is turns into ra. The best known examples of rhotacism comes from Latin and Germanic language, like in oldest Latin, saw to ra as seen in honoris and honorary. So this comes from onus, not honor. It retains the s since it is not between vowel in its form. So in later Latin, onus nominative singular, it becomes something like honor due to the analogy with other forms which contain the intervocalic raw due to rhotacism. So these are the primary sound changing processes that we see in languages or when there is something like a language contact. So I will take the question, and sorry if it is a little bit late because I have to look up to that who coined the word language shift. So that is asked from somebody. So yeah, note the name, the word language shift, but not language death. It is first proposed by somebody called Uriel Wenrich. I am writing the name in the chat box itself. Note the name. So this is the name of the person who coined this term language shift. So is there any other question? Any one of you have any question? If you do not have any question, I will shift to a topic which I have not really talked about in any of the slides, but it is very important and I will add a slide of this later. So the language typology, basic language typology is how we think about languages as their according to their types. So what do we mean according to their types? By their type we mean their structural features, the vocabulary and their grammaticality and many other features. Like there is qualitative also, there are quantitative typology. The qualitative typology, what I talked about in the last class, that is how we determine the word order and then how we classify the languages as according to their word orders, because the word orders of languages actually determine many other things like the prepositionality or post-propositionality and many other things. So quantitative typology is something, the preferences and correlations, by which I mean preferences is the universals, the language universals, the semantic maps and hierarchies. These are some things we will only learn in semantics, and it is in very high linguistics. And correlations is something like areal pattern and all that. That is something again we do not really study in ours. So there are other kinds of linguistic typology of world languages. If we think about that, there will be there's something like genealogical family, like Indo-European, Sino-Tibetan, Niger-Congo, Afroasiatic, Austrasian, Nean-Altic, Japanoic, Austrasiatic, and Thai-Kadai. These are language families in the world, but we do not really always type it in as according to all these, among which Niger, Congo, also Indo-Aryan. These are the two very broad language families in the world. Also, there is something like how we categorize agglutinating languages and isolating languages and all that. So there are different kinds of synthetic languages and all that. These are also morphology and all that, what we learn in morphology. And along with that, can I ask you, what do you know when you see something like a synthetic language? What do you imagine? A language which is synthesized, which is not original, but it is not like that. When we come to linguistics, there are different criteria to determine what is synthetic, what is not. So in languages families of the world, we also learn about there are major categories like isolating, agglutinating, templating, synthetic, analytic. So what do we mean by all this? You can read about this. I think it is better if you read about this from the slides than from Francis Katamba. He has everything written on this in a very systematic manner. So Francis Katamba's first 2 or 3 chapters, I think, is very important when you learn about morphology. So the language families of the world, that is in the I am seeing which chapter it is in. I'll upload the book later. Okay, guys, I am currently unable to find this chapter, but I will refer to this later. So, for now, you just know that there are 5 different forms, and you have to learn the examples of that. Like isolating languages, when we learn about this, we have to we are not expected to know the examples, but sorry, we are not supposed to know the definitions, but the examples more or less. So isolating language is a language where two morphemes, they do not have any inflection in their word formation process. Agglutinating is when they have inflection, but the morphemes, again, the morphemes have, they can, all the morphemes in an isolating language is a free morpheme. In agglutinating language, they are not. And in analytic or in synthetic languages, they are not really something which we call have free morphemes. Like, there are obviously free morphemes. All these open class words are always free morphemes with the closed class words, and there will be some bound morphemes which will be inflected to most of this like most of these free morphemes, and then they will refer to the grammatical category. So isolating languages will have a very strict word order. They do not have a very free word order in their sentences, like English, which is almost an isolating language. So although inflections exist in that language, there are 8 inflections in English all total, but in some language like Hindi or Bangla, they're analytical or they're synthetic because they are synthesized. By synthesis, here I mean the morphemes, the bound morphemes will be there in the synthetic languages. They will be added to the functional words. So, synthetic, sometimes agglutinative languages are also called synthetic languages. They come under synthetic languages like Korean, Japanese. These are agglutinative languages. Also, a famous example of agglutinative languages is Turkish. There are not many Indian languages which are agglutinative, but Tamil is a very good example of agglutination. So it is not that like all language have to have this strict category of being agglutinative or isolating. Like English is also called a polysynthetic or an analytic language, but it is also called an isolating. There are many debates. So I have said English is a polysynthetic language. It is not a polysynthetic language. It is an analytical language. So polysynthetic language is something which doesn't exactly have free morphemes at all. Like, the sentences are only can be understood in their context. There is no word. There are only morphemes. Morphemes will be like morphemes will connect to each other and form the sentence, and only then we will be able to know the meaning, what it wants to express, by looking at the whole sentence. So this is how we there will be other categories as well, and I will upload them as a slide or as a PDF later on. And for now, do you have any questions? Okay, English is kind of a synthetic language. So in synthetic languages, what we do is The words are formed by affixing a number of dependent morpheme to a root morpheme. So, what we mean by root? Okay, I am opening my morphology slide again so that you will be able to know what is root in a better way, because you haven't attended that class. So here you see there is this concept of root, base and stem. So a root word is a word which can exist with a meaning without having any affix attached to it. And affixes, they do not have any meaning separately. When they're attached to some word, only then the meaning can be derived. So the root word, like what is a root word? The word watch in English, it is a root word, and when we word add the affix es with it, it becomes something like watches, which can mean two things, like two time measurement instrument, also like the verb form of something akin to see in third person singular. So the man watches, she watches, he watches. And that is when we are synthesizing. By synthesizing, we are adding to it. So English is sometimes called an isolating language precisely, although it is synthetic, like although it has inflection. It's like there are 8 inflections I have listed in English. These are the 8 inflections. Although they have inflections, yet they are very less, like the appearance of it is very less. And also in English, like prepositions and postpositions, they do not have separately, like in Bangla, as we say something like bari tar upore, though, so there is like the word bari, which means a house. The on the house, it will be something like that in English. So bari tar upore, there are classifiers. Also there is the ra, the r. This is something which is marking the case. Okay, the case which is genitive case or possessive case. So in English, we do not get this many of case markers. The case markers are actually attributive to the inflectional processes in any language. So so in synthesis, by synthesis we mean that there will be a lot of inflections, like Sanskrit has 8 case markers, as much as it can be there in a language. So in Sanskrit, it is a very analytic, or it is a very synthetic language, but it is not polysynthetic, because there are free morphemes that exist in Sanskrit. But in something like the Inuit languages, the languages that is spoken in Greenland, they do not have free morphemes existing. By free morpheme, what I mean is the morpheme can exist on its own, like it will have a meaning on its own without being attached, without being affixed to any other morpheme. So in Inuit languages, what happens is they are all bound morphemes, they attach to each other, and when only in the sentence level they refer to something which has a meaning. The free morphemes always have a meaning. So since there is no free morpheme in a word level, since there is no word, there is no meaning only in the sentence level, it will have a meaning. So that is a polysynthetic language basically. So that is the primary difference between normal synthetic language or polysynthetic languages. So this is it. Also, there is a debate between like whether isolating languages should be called analytical and synthetic languages can be called only synthetic. So there are many different terms, many different linguists actually use, but I was referring to Francis Katamba specifically because that is the primary book they use for teaching morphology or the introduction to morphology in most universities. So that's why. Okay, what about Sanskrit? Can we say, yeah, it is a synthetic language? because there synthesis happening. Like I am using this word called like okay, so away, there is this, you can see, right, this slide. Here is vibhakti, there is the by vibhakti there is just case markers. Okay, so these, like the word nara in its first person, which is ek bochon, and first person singular, sorry, bochon is singular, basically the ekvachan is singular, so it means nara. Okay, and when it goes to this bahuvachan shashti, it becomes something like naranang. So what naranang means, it basically means the men's, okay, or the people's. So, by means or peoples, although English has this genitive form, this shoshti is the sixth form, it is actually referring to the genitive or possessive form, like something is possessing something. So, it means that the people's parliament, so the Naranang parliament or something like that, I am using parliament as parliament only, so it will be something like that. So this people's here, so the parliament of the people, there is nothing related to this parliament of the people. So like when we use something like okay, of or from, so in English there will be a word like of or from, there will be a preposition for that, but in Sanskrit there will not be a preposition or postposition for many of these forms, many of the prepositional forms, many of these prepositional cases. We will only have inflectional marker that will be attaching to the nominative case, like the nominal word or the pronoun or the noun only, and it will refer to something. So that's how it becomes synthetic language. Also in verbs, like you will see some inflections going on, like if you have learned Sanskrit or if you know your own language, so there will be something like tita santi sita sthami basmas, these forms, all these forms basically refer to different inflections that is based on tense, aspect, mood, or person, number, gender, these nominal or verbal aspects. So these are the primary sources from which verbs or nouns are getting inflected in some language. And in Sanskrit or in many Indo-Aryan languages, like still in Hindi or Bangla, in Ohmiya, there are many inflections going on. So that's why they are called, sometimes called synthetic, or sometimes they're also called inflectional languages as well in this typological categories. So Jivanisha, you have, I will take one more class, one doubt clearing class, where you will come up with your questions. There will be Google Forms, and there will be also a mock test where I will make 100 questions, and one question will have only 1 mark. So you will be marked according to that. So the question pattern and writing skill. Okay, there will not be any writing skill. The question pattern, I think, have changed from the 2019 to 2020. So you know one thing, there will only be objective questions. Okay, there will probably be some question from general knowledge or some constitutional aspects of languages, like they might ask something which is related to language, as well as in constitution, which is like how many scheduled languages. Or in our batch we were asked like which animals were there in Ashok Stambha. So these kinds of stupid general knowledge questions they sometimes ask. There might be some comprehensions related to linguistics, and they might ask some question from that, and you will be able to know the question patterns better when I will upload one of the mock tests. But yeah, know one thing, in my mock test there will be no question from GK. Actually there will be some most of the questions, like all of the questions, will be from linguistics, and all of them will have only 1 mark. So it can happen different, like the MCQ pattern can change from year to year, but there will only be MCQs. There will not be any subjective questions, which is very bad actually. But there will only be MCQs because NTA is going to conduct. And I think for your preparation, people, you can actually refer to. You go. Okay, I am going to the website. Okay, I'm presenting it. See how you will attempt the questions. Okay, I am showing it right now. So there is sorry. So there is a clean tab, as you can see in the Google. From there, you will go and type something like NTA mock tests in Google. From there, you will just see NTA mock test of National Testing Agency and select exam you will like to appear. From there, you will see JNU option, and for paper, you go there and you select linguistics JNU 2019. They still haven't updated the 2020's questions. So you go to linguistics 2019, start mock test, log in. You do not have to put anything. So click the checkbox and then proceed. And you can exactly appear here as you can appear in an exam. So the first question, the option will be B, optical mark reader. And when you save and next, and you just submit it after attempting all the 60 questions, then you can get your score. Okay, then you can get your score. So it is a very good way to evaluate yourself on your own. Yeah, so the IPA site I was referring to is okay. This is basically iphr.com. So that's it. There will be a question paper mock test. If I get a better response, I will make 2 mock test sets. The first mock test will appear on the 10th of September. Mark the date. This website is for phonetics basically. Okay. This website is basically for phonetics, so you can go to this iphr.com and you can go to this iphr.com and then you can see all this. Ignore all these ads because I am a woman, they always show me Nike ads. So go to this sounds and click on them, the vowels, consonant based on their high, open, mid, the voiced. They have like all of them with their sound itself. If you click on any of these sounds, they will basically pronounce it for you and you can get the sound clearly. And there will be many questions from this IPA chart, the places and manners of articulation. Okay. So I will upload it. I will upload everything by this Sunday, whatever the material there will be, because the exam is not like it is very near. And along with that, there is something like the mock tests will be there. So there will be Google form. The mock test will be based on Google form, or better, like I will try to make a CBT kind of paper where you will answer it and you can evaluate yourself. So I will try to make that kind of paper. Also, if I cannot make it, I will make it in the form of a Google form with options in MCQ. So it will be on Okay, Jivanesha, this was the last class. The next class, I will do a doubt clearing session, which will be after the mock tests you give. Okay, like you can read. By that time, you can read. All the slides will be uploaded. So that's it. And any other question? First one is on 10th, and only after that, like if I really have time, because I am also sitting for the PhD entrance exam of linguistics. Also, I have to sit for the UGC net. If I really have time, I will make another set within 7 days. The Google form, Madhurima will give you the Google form to sign. The question paper I haven't yet met. The Google form, Madhurima will contact you and she will give you the Google form. Okay. Any other question? Like you can turn off your mic and you can turn on your mic and you can ask it here instead of typing. Okay, do not, if you do not have, okay, ask, okay, if you do not really have any questions, so the Google form will be shared, and where you can also ask your question. Okay, we will probably have to make another Google form for all the queries and questions related to linguistics.
Okay. Actually, I am having difficulty with these kind of questions where they give you a hypothetical language, or and they give you sentences in some other language and its translation in English, and there are
Yeah.
questions based on that. I am having difficulty with that.
Okay, Astha, if you have difficulty with that, you can directly email me these kinds of question. I will be very happy to, I am writing my email and my, also you can just like contact me